He's been running from her for weeks. But when she finally corners him in the observation dome at 3 a.m., everything changes. A human captain and an alien princess discover that sometimes the universe needs more than just survivors. It needs rebels. Captain Marcus Reed had faced down alien armadas and navigated the treacherous waters of interstellar diplomacy, yet nothing had prepared him for Princess Lyra of the Valoran Empire. In his 3 years commanding the Horizon's Edge, he'd encountered 17 different alien species, beings with scales and wings, creatures of pure energy, silicon-based life forms that defied conventional biology. But none had unsettled him quite like the pale-skinned princess with silver hair that seemed to catch starlight itself. It wasn't her otherworldly beauty that troubled him, though the golden eyes that marked her royal bloodline were unsettling enough. It wasn't even the weight of her station as the daughter of Emperor Thane, whose military might stretched across 36 star systems like a tightening fist. What truly disturbed Marcus was the intensity of her gaze, the way it followed him through crowded corridors and quiet rooms alike, as if she could see something in him that he'd spent years trying to hide. The moment they first met crystallized in his memory with uncomfortable clarity. The diplomatic reception had been the usual choreography of power and politeness, ambassadors circling each other with careful smiles and measured words. Marcus had been standing near the observation deck's viewport, grateful for the temporary solitude, when he sensed her presence before he saw her. The crowd around him seemed to part naturally, officers instinctively creating space as she moved through them with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to absolute authority. She had excused herself from a conversation with Ambassador Torres mid-sentence, a breach of protocol that would have scandalized most diplomats, and made her way directly toward him. Her companions retreated with practiced efficiency, leaving him exposed beneath that golden gaze. "Captain Reed," she had said, her voice carrying the melodic accent of her people, each word seeming to resonate at a frequency just below his conscious hearing. "I have heard remarkable stories about your species. They say humans defeated the Kell Armada with only 12 ships." The way she pronounced it wasn't quite a question, though her inflection turned it into one. Marcus had responded with the rigid formality he reserved for diplomatic encounters, knowing instinctively that casual honesty would be dangerous around this woman. "We got lucky, Your Highness," he had said, the words tasting hollow even as they left his mouth. Her expression had shifted then, a slight curvature of her lips that might have been amusement or something far more dangerous. "Luck," she had repeated, and he had felt the weight of her skepticism. The Krell possessed 300 warships. Your species destroyed them with 12. Your people call that luck. In her tone lay something that sounded uncomfortably like admiration, and Marcus had excused himself as quickly as protocol permitted, retreating through the bulkhead door while feeling her gaze burn against his back like the radiation of a dying star. That encounter had occurred 6 weeks ago, and since then, Princess Lyra had been assigned quarters deep within the ship's residential sections, ostensibly to observe human culture and familiarize herself with diplomatic protocols before the Valoran Empire formally joined the Galactic Council. In reality, Marcus had come to understand that her assignment was far more personal. She had become an omnipresent phantom haunting his daily existence. She appeared in the mess during his meals, her presence drawing the attention of every officer within visual range. She requested tours of the engineering sections during his designated duty shifts, somehow possessing an uncanny knowledge of his schedule before he altered it. She asked pointed questions during strategic briefings that only his expertise could adequately address, questions that seemed designed less to gather information and more to force him into direct conversation. The crew had begun to notice the pattern, and with that notice came complications. Whispers shadowed his movements through the corridors. Junior officers exchanged knowing glances when he entered rooms. Lieutenant Hayes had made an ill-advised joke about royal attention that earned him a sharp rebuke and 2 weeks of extra duty assignments, a punishment Marcus had assigned personally, hoping the message would discourage further speculation. But avoiding the princess had become his consuming mission. Marcus reconstructed his entire routine with military precision. He took his meals at random hours, timing his visits to the mess to minimize the probability of encountering her. He delegated his bridge duties whenever possible, spending longer hours alone in his quarters with maintenance reports and personnel files, using the mundane paperwork as a shield against her determined courtship. When she requested a tour of the medical bay, he had sent Commander Wilson in his place, claiming an urgent operational matter that barely existed. Wilson had returned hours later with a frown etched across his weathered face. "She asked for you specifically, sir," Wilson had reported, his confusion evident. "Seemed genuinely disappointed when I showed up instead. Almost looked offended, if I'm reading those alien expressions correctly." The truth that Marcus harbored, the real reason for his retreat, was far more complicated than mere discomfort. He carried within him the historical weight of his entire species' existence in the galactic community. Humans had been recognized as a spacefaring civilization for less than a decade. Before first contact, Earth had existed in blessed ignorance, unaware of the thousands of civilizations that filled the stars like grains of sand in an impossible ocean. The Krell had changed everything. They had arrived not as explorers but as conquerors, attacking with the casual certainty of a species that saw humanity as minor and brief, a threat to be eliminated within weeks, a notation in their conquest records already written. The galaxy had watched with interest, certain they were witnessing extinction. But humanity had refused to cooperate with the script written for them. Human pilots, flying in ships that were barely functional, had executed maneuvers that defied conventional strategy, turning what should have been suicide runs into devastating victories. Human engineers had accomplished feats of improvisation that made physicists weep, jury-rigging weapons from mining equipment, creating solutions from desperation. Human soldiers had held positions with a ferocity that made even hardened alien warriors hesitate, fighting on long after every reasonable species would have surrendered to inevitable defeat. The price had been staggering. 3 billion human lives had been spent like currency, sacrificed on 1,000 battlefields across dozens of systems. But from that apocalyptic fire, humanity had emerged victorious, traumatized, transformed, and suddenly visible to the entire galactic community. Now the other species watched humanity with an incomprehensible mixture of fear and fascination, the way one might regard a child playing with fire, beautiful and terrible and impossible to predict. The Valorans were particularly intrigued, their philosophers debating what they termed the human paradox. How could beings so fragile in their individual forms be so devastating collectively? How could creatures driven by emotion be so ruthlessly calculating in battle? How could a species balance hope and desperation so precariously on a knife's edge? Marcus suspected that Princess Lyra had developed an academic interest in him as the living embodiment of this paradox, a walking specimen of the human condition she wished to analyze and understand. The possibility made his skin crawl. He had not fought his way through a planetary hell to become an exhibit in some royal collection of interesting aliens, a curiosity to be displayed and discussed. His avoidance continued for weeks, a carefully choreographed dance of evasion that consumed more energy than facing her directly might have. He varied his routines daily, randomizing his presence in the ship's various sections. He assigned other officers to every task that might create an opportunity for chance encounters. He had once actually hidden himself in a storage locker when he heard her voice echoing down a corridor, remaining there in darkness for 20 minutes until Lieutenant Hayes discovered him, emerging from the shelves with the wisdom to ask no questions about what the captain was doing crouched among maintenance supplies. Marcus had known with the clarity of someone accustomed to reading strategic situations that his defensive position could not hold indefinitely. The laws of probability alone guaranteed eventual contact. Yet he had clung to hope, believing he could maintain his distance until the princess completed her observation period and returned to Valoran space. Only 3 more weeks remained in her assignment. 3 weeks had seemed manageable, an acceptable distance to maintain until the situation resolved itself. He had miscalculated the determination of a Valoran princess. He discovered this miscalculation at 03-hour ship time on a night he had confirmed through careful verification that she was attending a cultural exchange program in the recreation sector. The observation dome, positioned at the ship's zenith, had always been his sanctuary, a place where the rules of command and protocol seemed less oppressive, where he could stand beneath the infinite canvas of space and remember why he had fought so hard to keep humanity alive. He had come here seeking exactly that kind of solitude, desperate to escape the weight of duty that pressed down on his shoulders with increasing force. He'd been standing at the viewport for perhaps 10 minutes, watching starlight refract through the transparent aluminum dome, when he heard the soft hiss of the entrance seal releasing behind him. The shock of her presence struck him like a physical force, but it was her voice that truly undid him. "Captain Reed." The usual melodic accent was there but muted, transformed by something that sounded disturbingly like pain. Marcus turned despite every instinct screaming at him to maintain his distance, and what he saw stopped his breath entirely. Princess Lyra stood in the doorway, illuminated by the scattered light of the stars beyond, and she was crying. Valorans wept differently than humans. Instead of the transparent salt solution that ran down human cheeks, their tears were luminescent, leaving trails of soft blue light as they fell, as if she were shedding fragments of star. In the dim lighting of the observation dome, that gentle glow made her appear ethereal, almost translucent, a being composed of sorrow and starlight. Every diplomatic protocol he had ever been taught, every strategic training session, every carefully prepared response to potential scenarios simply evaporated. His mind spun uselessly, unable to locate any handbook entry for what to do when an alien princess cries in your private sanctuary. The words that emerged from his mouth were stumbling, inadequate. "Your Highness, are you hurt? Should I call the medical team?" Even as he spoke, he knew he was asking the wrong questions, addressing symptoms rather than causes. The response that came was raw and urgent, cutting through his careful formality like a blade. "Why do you run from me?" The question seemed to tear itself from her throat, each word weighted with genuine anguish. "What have I done to earn such contempt?" In her voice, he heard not the composed authority of a princess, but the vulnerable confusion of someone who had been rejected without understanding why. Something within Marcus cracked under the weight of her pain, some carefully constructed wall of self-protection that had been growing more fragile with each passing week. "I don't hold you in contempt," he said, and the words felt truer than most he'd spoken in weeks. "I've simply been busy with my duties." Even as he offered the excuse, he knew how transparent it was, how insulting the lie must sound to someone as perceptive as she clearly was. Lyra's expression hardened, and she stepped further into the dome, the door sealing behind her with a decisive hiss. "Do not lie to me," she commanded, and her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to having their words obeyed. "I am not a fool, Captain. You have avoided me for weeks. You leave rooms when I enter. You hide from my presence. I have felt you flee down corridors specifically to escape me. In my culture, such behavior indicates either fear or disgust. Have humans learned to fear the Valorans so quickly?" The accusation hung between them, neither fully true nor completely false. "No," Marcus replied, the denial carrying more force than he'd intended. "Of course not." "Then you are disgusted by me?" The question emerged quietly, and he heard beneath it the echo of genuine hurt, the vulnerability of someone who had opened herself to rejection. "No." This word came out like a shout in the quiet dome. "That's not it at all." She took another step toward him, her luminescent tears still falling in gentle trails of blue light. "Then what?" Her voice held a note of desperation now, a plea for understanding. "I came to your ship hoping to learn what made your species accomplish what no other has managed. I wanted to understand what creates such strength, such resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. I came with honest intentions and found only rejection. Tell me what I have done to deserve this. Please." The question broke something inside Marcus, and he felt his carefully constructed defenses collapse entirely. Perhaps it was the accumulated exhaustion of weeks of evasion. Perhaps it was the genuine anguish in her voice reaching something deep within him that he couldn't armor against. Perhaps it was simply that he was tired of running, tired of carrying the burden of his assumptions in silence. The words came pouring out before he could stop them, raw and unfiltered and dangerously honest. "You look at me like I'm special," he said quietly, and the words seemed to echo in the observation dome. "Like humans are something extraordinary, something worth studying and admiring. We're not. We're just stubborn, and too stupid to quit when we should. 3 billion people died fighting the Krell. 3 billion individual lives, each one someone's mother or brother or child, erased in an instant. We didn't win because we were strong or noble or exceptional. We won because we were desperate and trapped and willing to sacrifice everything because the alternative was extinction. There's nothing noble about that. Nothing worth studying or admiring. We're just survivors of a genocide that nearly erased our entire species." Lyra had ceased crying, her tears dissipating in the starlight. She stared at him with those golden eyes, and for a long moment that stretched like hours, neither of them spoke. The silence was profound, filled with the weight of things unspoken, emotions too complex for simple articulation. Outside the dome, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of beings who inhabited the darkness between them. Finally, when Marcus thought he might shatter from the weight of the quiet, Lyra spoke. You truly believe that?" Her voice was different now, transformed by something he couldn't quite identify. "Yes," Marcus replied. "And you are the fool, Captain Reed." The words weren't cruel, but they struck him with surprising force. "Do you know what the other species say about humans? They say you are reckless. They say you are dangerous. They say you cannot be trusted because you do not know when to surrender, do not understand the concept of inevitable defeat." Her voice had grown stronger, more certain, and she moved closer still. "And they are right. Every word of it is absolutely correct. But do you know what else they say?" Marcus shook his head, unable to find his voice. "They say that if they had possessed human allies during their own dark times, their civilizations might not have fallen to ruin. They say that human courage, foolish and reckless as it may be, burns like a light in a galaxy that has grown too cautious and fearful. They say that humanity reminds them of what they themselves once were, before fear made them weak, before comfort made them complacent. They say that to see humans fight for something greater than themselves, to watch you sacrifice without counting the cost, to observe your absolute refusal to bow to despair, it reconnects them to something they thought was lost forever." She took another step closer, and Marcus found himself unable to retreat. "I did not come here to study a specimen, Captain. I came here because my people are dying. Not in war, but in spirit. We have grown soft, comfortable in our vast territories and our centuries of prosperity. We have forgotten what it means to stand for something, to fight for something greater than our own survival. When I heard what humans accomplished against the Krell, when I learned that a species barely evolved past their technological infancy had stood against extinction and not only survived but prevailed, I knew I had to see it with my own eyes. I had to understand how a people finds the strength to stand when every rational calculation suggests they should fall." Marcus felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning with an intensity that surprised him. He wanted to speak, to defend himself against these accusations and contradictions, but the words wouldn't come. "And did you find your answer?" he asked instead. "No," Lyra admitted, and a sad smile touched her lips. "Because the one human I most needed to speak with has been running away from me for weeks, hiding from conversations that might have illuminated the truth. You have kept yourself from me, and in doing so, you have deprived my people of the wisdom they so desperately need." The silence that followed was fundamentally different from what had come before. Where the previous quiet had been heavy and fraught with tension, this silence was softer, almost companionable. It felt like the moment before dawn, when darkness begins its retreat, but light hasn't quite emerged. The stars beyond the viewport seemed to shine brighter than Marcus had ever seen them, casting their light across the observation dome in patterns that shifted with the ship's rotation, creating an ever-changing display of cosmic beauty. "I apologize, Your Highness," Marcus said finally, the words inadequate but sincere. "I made assumptions about your intentions. I thought you saw us as curiosities, as specimens in some grand experiment. I was wrong." "You were afraid," Lyra said with surprising gentleness. "And you were wrong to run. Will you stop now?" Marcus met her golden gaze and felt something fundamental shift within his chest. "Yes," he said, "I will stop running." "Good." The faintest hint of a genuine smile touched her lips, transforming her face from ethereal to radiant. "Then perhaps you could start by explaining how your species developed faster than light travel in less than 2 years after first contact. The scientific community across the galaxy is still absolutely baffled by your technological acceleration." Marcus found himself laughing despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and the weight of his people's history that hung between them. "We stole it," he admitted. "Well, we call it rapid technology integration, but basically we stole it from a crashed Krell scout ship. We analyzed the drive systems and reverse-engineered the whole thing in the time span your people would consider impossible." Lyra's smile widened, becoming conspiratorial. "Of course you did. Only humans would be bold enough to admit that so freely, and only humans would consider stealing alien technology during wartime to be an acceptable application of resources." They stood together in the observation dome as the stars streamed past in their infinite procession, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt the tremendous weight that had been pressing down on his shoulders lighten perceptibly. Perhaps humanity wasn't special in the grand cosmic scheme of things. Perhaps they were exactly what Lyra had said, stubborn and reckless and too foolish to know when they were beaten. But perhaps in a galaxy that had somehow forgotten how to hope, that had become too comfortable in its power and too cautious in its vision, being stubborn and foolish and unwilling to surrender, was exactly what the universe needed. Perhaps that was special after all. What did you think? Was Marcus right to be afraid, or was Lyra? Drop your take in the comments below. The best responses get featured in our next video. New cinematic sci-fi narratives dropping every Wednesday. Don't miss the next chapter. Hit that notification bell now. Want to read the full story with exclusive bonus scenes exploring what happens after they leave the observation dome? Subscribe to unlock the extended narrative and discover how Marcus and Lyra's connection transforms the future of human-Valoran relations. Like this story? Check out our playlist of epic sci-fi romance narratives that explore alien encounters and unlikely connections that change the course of history. Tell me, Lyra said, and her voice held the warmth of genuine interest rather than academic detachment, what made you so determined to survive? What quality did humanity possess that made surrender seem impossible? And Marcus, looking out at the infinite expanse of stars that stretched before them, his hands slowly moving to gently touch hers as starlight danced across their skin, began to talk.